Hello and welcome to Friday Night Drives. The first thing I'm going to do is, of course, apologise for the lack of episode last week. Unfortunately, everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and, well, yep, there was no video, but I do have a pretty interesting topic, at least I feel it is today. I was, sifting through my subscribed box on YouTube looking for new things, and there was a video that I came across that was actually kind of interesting, and it was by Boogie2988, I think that's the number. I'm sure you're all aware of who he is. Quite a big personality, and it was titled The Inconvenient Truth About Modern Gaming, and he pretty much was talking about DLC, microtransactions, day one DLC, season passes, essentially just monetizing games in general, but more importantly, he was kind of talking about how these have become, and how they've sort of become acceptable, and how they're kind of still happening, even though a lot of people seem to have something against them. So a couple of things he went over that I thought was quite interesting was he was saying that this sort of thing happens for two reasons, and one of those main reasons is simply the fact that people were buying it. And this, to me, this is kind of the issue, but I'm also starting to wonder if this really is an issue. People are buying these things because they want to buy these things, and in most cases, then that's not a problem at all. Why shouldn't we? If we want to go and spend some money on extra weapons or little outfits, things that have no real impact in the game, purely cosmetic and just fun things. If we want an extra map so that we can extend the life of the game that we paid so much money for, I don't see what the problem is there. I don't see any issues with that. If I'm going to go and buy a feather to wear in my cool bandana in a game that I spent a lot of money on so that I have a little bit more fun with it, I can't see that as a real issue. I don't think that's the real issue. I think the issue is a little bit further than that. But before I really go into that, I want to go over the second point he made, and that's just the fact that games are costing too much and companies need to break even on these sort of ventures when they're building games and developing games. And that sort of led me to thinking about how this has sort of come about as well. If we look back about 10 years, this sort of thing didn't exist. And I'm wondering what really changed. Now, there are a few things that I think are quite obvious. For example, there aren't secondhand games. If we go back that far, maybe that's the wrong way to put it. There definitely weren't as much secondhand games. You didn't have stores that just sold secondhand games and game consoles and that sort of stuff. Maybe one or two here and there. Sure, you had things like I don't know what they call them, like we have cash converters and things like that, like pawn shops, I believe they're called. That sort of stuff existed, but not really to the extent that you have now. There's secondhand media shops, every other shop down a high street these days. It's a very, very, very big business. But the real issue there is that obviously secondhand games don't make a single penny for the developer. They only really make that money on the first point of sale, and then the game is then sold back to somebody else who then sells it. The developer sees none of it. So in selling games and getting the game to become more popular, sure, they're picking up some sales, but then a lot of these sales now are actually going purely towards these second-hand retailers, which I think is a completely separate topic on its own, and something I'm more than happy to go into depth on if you guys actually want to hear about it. But I think that's quite a big reason. But you've also got less competition as well. You didn't really have as many companies as you do these days creating games. Creating games is not as difficult as it was then, and everybody has a computer in their house to do these sort of things on. And you also have things, there's less publishing deals and less retailer deals, and game companies didn't have to spend so much or take so much of a hit on selling their game. For example, if you walk into a store and purchase a hard copy of these games, then the retailer will take a cut of that, and if the game was published by somebody else, they will take a cut of that as well before the developers actually see any of this money. So I think the reason why we didn't really see much of this before is simply because all the money went to the developers. There would have been smaller teams. These days, we've got a lot less expensive hardware as well. Now, it turns out Boogie did some of this math stuff that exists in the world, and games are actually apparently working out to be cheaper now than what they used to be in terms of inflation. That kind of surprises me as well. I'm assuming that would mean that they're cheaper to produce as well, which I can kind of understand, but this stuff was a I don't know, it just seems it's just harder to believe that they could still profit on it than when we have so many different means of acquiring games these days. But maybe that's half the point. I mean, if we look at things like Steam, websites like G2A and Kinguin and all of these websites, there are so many places where you can pick up games these days, and I'm starting to wonder whether that's why we see a lot of these small unsuccessful games, because they're everywhere. If you went to a shop 5-10 years ago to buy a game, you went there for that game, you kind of knew what you were looking for, and you would know that these games that have been put on the shelves have been put on the shelves by people with money or with a name for themselves, that kind of thing. Whereas now I could go and build a game on a free piece of software and I could get it greenlit on Steam, and then millions and millions of people would have access to that. And I'm wondering whether that's why we see this a lot more now, because we have much smaller games and much less successful games appearing, and all it will take is someone big on the internet to cover one of these games for everyone to want to purchase some of these games. I don't know whether I'm going around in a circle here, but this kind of makes sense in my head. If we went back, say, 5 or 10 years, then I feel like all of these companies that don't break even or they're not profiting from their game, they kind of disappear. They wouldn't just stay on a website. It doesn't cost you anything to stay on a website. I mean, sure, it will cost you something to host the website or to run the website. But I mean, we're talking pennies, not as much as it would cost to keep printing out physical discs and producing physical copies and having stores stock them in spaces that could be stocked by things that really sell. And I think things like Steam really stop the need for people to need to make hard copies of discs. They can just upload a file to the internet. That is really all it takes. And I think that's probably why we're seeing a lot of smaller games coming through. And that's why we're not seeing so much of this only successful games being big, I think. But if we go back to the real point here, the real point about DLC and all this extra monetization of games that we've already paid for, we've really got to look at developers and publishers and people like that to sort of stop this. I mean, Boogie did point out in that video, when it came to the PS4 launch and the Xbox One launch, there was big rumors about games going from about $60 up to $80 for the sort of standard AAA titles. And a lot of people weren't happy about that, of course, because that is a lot of money, especially for a video game. And these companies listened, they heard that, and they didn't follow through with this price change. They kept the prices where they were, and that didn't change. But I think the issue now is that people are buying them and expecting them to be there, and these companies aren't going to remove that. They have no reason to. It's not a unanimous, please don't do this anymore. And I'll get to that in a minute, but I think one of the real things here is that a few companies do this, and we see a very similar thing over on Twitch, and I've heard a lot of big personalities talk about this before, and this comes down to sort of donations and tipping streamers and even YouTubers and things like that. There are a lot of big personalities that don't like this sort of stuff. They don't want to accept this sort of stuff. They would rather a full-on subscription, or they'd rather another way around it. But by not having a means to receive donate, they're literally just leaving money there. They're just saying, nope, I don't want this money that is coming to me anyway, kind of thing. And we know that game companies are spending more and more and more and more to produce games, and it's going to get harder to make profit and have success with this. But I think, yeah, right. I think a lot of this does come down to greed as well. And I wonder if there's really a big issue here, or whether the issue is just a few companies making this a big issue. Now, if we have a look at things like the smaller things that we were talking about in the beginning, if we go back to being able to buy funny color shoes for a character, things like that, then that's fine. But when we talk about buying the second half of a cutscene for the same amount as the game 2 weeks later or the day it's released, we've got some issues. You know, there are still companies that are doing this, and we can't stop it, because there's a lot of talk about how we need to vote with our wallets and things like that. And I've heard a lot of it down to pre-orders and pre-order incentives and that sort of stuff, and to get rid of it, and that's fine. But we can't really vote with our wallets when half the time this is actually okay. This isn't an issue half the time. It's okay to want to buy little cosmetic items. That is not an issue at all. It's only really becoming the issue once we get to hiding content from the game behind a paywall. But this is where I think things are going to struggle to change. If, for example, a game has 10 playable characters, what we will see these days is 7 characters on release, 1 character if you pre-order the game from a certain shop, and 2 characters at £2 each or $3 each if you would like to purchase them later. But let's say that a game now comes out with 10 characters, including all those characters. I think we are going to see a lot of people wonder where the extra ones are, or how they could get better outfits for the current ones and where they can spend this money. People want to be able to do that, and I can't see the issue with it, but it's frustrating because the issue is not that that's an issue, it's that it's okaying people to do worse things. And I think that's where we're really stuck. And I generally think this isn't really going to end. I think we're going to end up with things like Telltale Games, for example, release things in seasons. I quite like this idea. I think it's kind of cool to have the story like that into 3 or 4 cheaper games rather than one 30-hour really expensive game. I think this is quite a nice way to do it. It also allows the studio to actually profit from a game before they work on sort of the game a little bit more, kind of like Kickstarters and things like that. And I think this is okay because we are seeing some really good content from it. But I really do think this is the way things are going to end up. And each of these seasons are then going to have little bonus content incentives where you can purchase a hat, or you can purchase a new place to walk around, or you can unlock little things like that, and that's fine. But I think until we can get rid of the second points of sale and things like that, and we can find a way to curate in-app purchases or in-game purchases some way, which I really don't think is going to be possible, I think it's going to become a little bit harder to make a definite line between buying a little pink scarf or buying the second part of the game I've already purchased. I think that's where we're going to have trouble, because until we can really clarify between that, we can't really do much about it. I mean, sure, we can sort of talk between ourselves and say, yeah, no, I don't want to have to buy the third part of this game because I've already bought this game and I'm entitled to it. But people are still going to sit there and purchase all of these things from in-games, so the companies aren't hearing it. They don't want to hear words and what we say. They hear with money, basically, is what I'm getting at. Until we change the way we're sort of doing that, this whole thing isn't going to change. And I think that's kind of where we're stuck now. I think that's the real point we've got to. But I might just be making this up, and I might just be rambling on about something that's really not an issue. Maybe none of this really matters and people are happy to do this. I do think it is only a few specific companies that are doing things like this, and I do think it is only a couple of people that are really creating problems here. And these problems are coming in the same way as pre-ordering games have. Now, we all know that pre-ordering games isn't the best idea because we have things like, the only thing I think of off the top of my head is the SimCity launch, for example. When that launched, it didn't even work most of the time. There was all the DRM issues. People couldn't play the game for weeks. But they pre-ordered this. They'd already thrown a load of money into it. And that kind of left EA to be a little bit lazy with it. We saw this with, I believe, GTA 4 was a really bad port when it came out. But people weren't able to be aware of that. And there are a lot of people that probably wouldn't have put that much money into it if they had have known. And I think this is, again, is a separate situation that I'm willing to go into if people are interested. But yeah, the main thing I really wanted to go over today was this whole DLC, season pass, monetizing games in different ways thing. In terms of in-app purchases and little mobile games and stuff like that, it's okay with these freemium kind of games where it's a free title, and if you would like to pay a couple of £1 for something, then sure, that's fine. But when you're paying for part of the game that was taken out on purpose, I mean, it wasn't like they built this afterwards. They made this whole game and then took pieces out, and then they sell them to you after you've already purchased the game. That's where we're finding real issues, and these people are getting away with it because they think it's okay because we're buying funny colored horse saddles and weird stuff like that. But yeah, I think I've covered most of what I wanted to cover. I actually recorded this video in quite a different way I've decided to pre-record the footage so I can just focus on speaking. Turns out it didn't make me any better at driving whatsoever. It actually meant that I got through talking a lot quicker, so I've got sort of double the footage. But it meant I could structure things, which I still struggled at. I still sort of skip between points. I've got some notes and stuff and whatever. I'm going to leave it at that. I would really like to hear your guys' opinions and anything that you think about this. If you do want to, then just drop some comments down below. I like replying to you guys. The whole reason I do this whole thing is to talk to other people about things that interest me and that I care about. If you don't have a YouTube account, then I mean, I don't believe you really have the internet, but I also have the Twitter and everything else. You can go tweet at me and bug me over there or something. But if you do have any opinions on this, I would be really interested to hear them, because I'm starting to wonder whether I'm just crazy. It all sounds a bit crazy when I speak it back. But there you go. I am going to call the episode there. I know this has actually been a little bit shorter than I planned on. But there you go. If you have enjoyed it, you do know what to do. And like I said, please do get involved and leave me some ideas if there's things you want me to sort of talk about or look into. Or I know I have got a few questions that I promised I would answer, and I will answer them. I'm going to try and build up a few more. Some of those are quite long-winded actually, but I'm going to answer them and then see how many I can fit into episodes and go over them like that. But yeah, this sort of popped up in my YouTube inbox thing, and I felt like I wanted to talk about it, so that's what I've done. But yeah, thanks again for watching. I do very much appreciate it. You guys have been absolutely incredible since I have returned, and yes, I'll see you next time.